Welcome to Stories of the Wanderer, a calming sleep story series created to help you unwind and gently drift into rest. Tonight we enter the second chapter of The Sand Remembers, Secrets in the Stillness of the Hall. In this chapter, the wanderer moves through the quiet palace at night and discovers a hidden garden with a calm that settles deep within him. Night settled into the palace, as if someone had drawn a veil across the corridors, softening every edge and turning distance into hush. After a light supper in the courtyard and affectionate good nights from his gracious hosts, the wanderer had been shown to a sleeping nook just off the main hall, a small arched alcove with a linen curtain that breathed gently with the night air. A low bed waited inside, layered with plush cushions and a neatly folded cotton blanket, arranged with the quiet competence of people who knew how to make a stranger feel expected. He lay down with gratitude spreading through his limbs, and for a while he listened to the palace settling around him. Somewhere above, the courtyard fountain kept its steady, threading trickle. From farther away came the faint creak of old wood cooling, and the occasional sigh of fabric as it shifted in the breeze. The wanderer let his breathing slow to match the sounds, as if he were joining a rhythm the building had been keeping long before he arrived. Sleep, however, held itself at a courteous distance. His body relaxed, yet his mind wandered through the day's impressions with an almost tender reluctance to let them go. The sparkle of mosaic tiles catching sunlight, the warmth in Farron's attentive gaze, the perfume of jasmine and orange blossoms that had sweetened the evening air. He hovered in that starlit corridor between wakefulness and dreams, content enough to remain there. Perhaps an hour passed, or perhaps less. Time in such stillness softened into something immeasurable. Curiosity, gentle as a fingertip on the shoulder, nudged him upright. Farron's earlier reassurance returned to him with the ease of a well-learned blessing. This is your home as long as you stay. Wander if you wish. Every room holds some comfort. The wanderer rose with the quiet grace of a cat. He stepped out of his alcove and found the great hall open before him in a blue-tinged half-light. He slipped on soft leather sandals, though the soles barely whispered against the cool stone. Drawing his robe closer to hold back the chill that gathered in the floor, he noticed an earthenware oil lamp on a small stand by the doorway, its flame left ready as if someone had anticipated midnight restlessness. He lifted it by its handle, cupped his hand around the tiny glow, and began to move down the hall. Between the stately columns he paused, taken anew by how moonlight had changed everything. By day, the hall had seemed alive with colour, golden beams teasing motion from the mosaics, the polished marble answering back with bright flashes. Now the space was an ocean of shadow and silver, its beauty quieter, more inward. The pillars rose like patient sentinels. Their carvings disappeared except where a wandering beam caught a line of gilding or a curve of stone and coaxed it into a gentle glint. High above, narrow latticed windows admitted threads of moonlight that fell in delicate patterns across the tiles. A pale tapestry laid over the floor. The air was cool and unmoving, an ancient calm that worked its way into his bones. The last trace of sandalwood incense lingered from the evening prayers, mingling with the dry, comforting scent of paper and the faint sweetness of wood from the library shelves. Together, they made a perfume of knowledge and tranquility, as fitting as any consecration for a hall that had hosted countless nights of contemplation. Far ahead, a dim pool of gold suggested a lamp still burning. The wanderer moved toward it on silent feet and found, in a library alcove, the elderly scholar he had met at supper. The old man had dozed on a floor cushion, with an open book resting across his lap. His hands lay on the pages as though he had been reading a final line when sleep simply gathered him up. A cup of tea sat nearby, long cooled. His spectacles had slipped to the tip of his nose, and his breathing was steady and unhurried. The sight warmed the wanderer with an affectionate kind of amusement. He lifted a folded blanket from a bench and draped it around the scholar's shoulders, tucking the edges carefully so the man would not wake from cold. The scholar murmured, shifted, and then sank deeper into comfort without opening his eyes. The oil lamp beside him burned low, its wick beginning to sputter. With the same care, the wanderer trimmed it and added a few drops of oil from a small copper flask he found nearby. The flame steadied, brightening just enough to turn the open pages into a small island of light. Satisfied, the wanderer moved on, leaving the scholar sleeping under a gentle halo. He wandered among the shelves, letting his fingertips skim the spines of worn leather volumes and the smooth ends of rolled scrolls. Even at midnight, the library felt inviting, as if the books themselves held a little warmth. Titles in many scripts lined the shelves: poetry and history, science and stories of distant countries, each one a door that could open in the mind. A faint hint of dried lavender drifted from between the bindings, tucked there to keep the pages sweet. On impulse, he drew out a slim journal and opened it beneath his lamp. It proved to be an old botanist's notebook, filled with elegant sketches of plants and careful annotations. One page held a lotus blossom floating on still water, its petals drawn with such patience that the flower seemed almost to breathe. In the margin, the writer had noted that the lotus signified serenity. The wanderer smiled and traced the drawn petals lightly. This palace, he thought, was a lotus in the desert, an unlikely bloom of peace offering comfort to whoever found it. A soft touch of air brushed the back of his neck. He went still, surprised by the sensation in a hall that felt sealed beneath the earth. The heavy doors to the main courtyard were closed. No ordinary draught should have slipped in. Yet the tiny flame in his lamp fluttered, as if acknowledging a breath, and then, after a moment, it steadied again. The wanderer listened. At first there was only the quiet he had already come to trust. Then another faint current moved through the hall, cooler and slightly damp, carrying the unmistakable scent of fresh water and green leaves. It smelled like the edge of an oasis, like shade and living things. Under that scent, he caught a second clue, a nearly inaudible drip, delicate and rhythmic. It was not the courtyard fountain. That familiar sound had faded into distance. This was nearer, secretive, as though water were speaking from behind stone. He moistened a fingertip and held it up, turning slowly until he felt the cool current kiss one side. It drew him toward a far corner where a large embroidered tapestry hung. Keeping his lamp low, he approached, and the woven scene began to shimmer under a single shaft of moonlight. Gold and silver threads flashed subtly, making the depicted garden, courtiers strolling among fountains and the fruit trees, seem to stir with life. The bottom edge of the heavy cloth quivered. It lifted a fraction, then settled again, moved by an unseen breath. The wanderer set his lamp into a wall bracket to free both hands. The tapestry was heavier than it looked, but he managed to pull it aside without snagging the embroidery. Behind it, set flush into the stone, waited a door of dark oak reinforced with iron bands. Its arched top mirrored the palace's architecture, and the latch was wrought in the shape of a lotus in bloom. His pulse quickened as he touched the cold metal. The latch turned without a click, and the door eased open with a soft, reluctant groan. Immediately, a colder breath spilled through the crack, smelling of earth and water, and the murmur of a hidden stream rose to meet him. For a moment, he had the vivid sense that he had unsealed the mouth of an underground spring, and the night itself was exhaling. He glanced back across the hall. The scholar still slept, undisturbed, wrapped in his blanket and dreams. The wanderer slipped through the opening and pulled the door nearly closed behind him. A narrow spiral staircase curled downward into darkness. The walls pressed close, smooth under his palm, and the steps were carved from bedrock, their centers worn shallow by countless careful feet. This passage was built for necessity, servants' escape, secret errands, not for show. He descended slowly, letting each step land with a softness that kept the sound to a hush. The curved walls returned his faint scuffs as whispers. With every turn, the air grew cooler and damper, like the deepening of a cave. The murmur of water grew clearer too, a continuous liquid lullaby calling from below. His fingers trailed along the clammy stone. In one crevice, a patch of moss clung and thrived, velvety and saturated. Lower down, a tiny fern had rooted in a crack, its fronds jeweled with dew that caught the scant light. Even here, where no sun should reach, the palace made room for green life. After several turns, he noticed a dim, silvery glow pooling below. To keep his night vision intact, he pinched out his lamp, and darkness closed around him. He waited until his eyes adjusted, then continued, guided by the pale light and the sound of flowing water. The spiral ended at a small arched doorway. The wooden door stood open and latched back, as if someone had left it that way on purpose. Not carelessly, but with invitation. Moonlight poured through, carrying scents of damp soil and foliage that made his lungs widen with astonishment. He stepped through. A hidden courtyard garden lay before him, bathed in moonlight. It was smaller and more secluded than the grand courtyard above, enclosed by high stone walls that held the night's coolness like a bowl holds water. Overhead, an indigo sky glittered with stars, and the low moon angled pale beams into the enclosure so that some corners remained in shadow, while others were brushed with silver. The hard stone of the passage gave way to earth under his feet, softened by a springy carpet of moss that swallowed sound. A few paces ahead, a narrow stream gushed from a spout in the wall into a stone basin and spilled over as a tiny waterfall, feeding a brook that wound through the garden with unhurried grace. This was the source of the secret drip and murmur, a steady, gentle music that blended with the silence and made the night feel deeper. The air was cool and heavy with moisture, like the heart of an oasis. The wanderer inhaled, and his senses woke to layers of scent, the loamy sweetness of wet earth, the green brightness of leaves, and, threaded through it all, the fragrance of blossoms. Night-blooming jasmine released its honeyed perfume in small bursts, and a faint echo of orange blossom lingered, as if the day had left a signature on the breeze. The mingled fragrance was so alive, It seemed impossible that sand and barren rock could exist beyond these walls. A path of flat stones led him away from the stair. Moss and creeping thyme cushioned the gaps between them, and small white jasmine flowers lay scattered across the stones like fallen stars. One petal had landed on the toe of his sandal. He paused to brush it away, watching it flutter down to join the others. As his eyes settled into the low light, the garden revealed more of itself. Ivy climbed the walls in thick, tenacious patterns, and vines of bougainvillea and jasmine spilled over parapets above. In one corner, an orange tree lifted glossy leaves toward the moon. A few late fruits hung like small lanterns. Nearby, a slender date palm raised feathery fronds to the sky. Branches and vines intertwined overhead to form a living lattice, and moonlight filtered through it in shifting designs that moved when the breeze moved. Across the garden, in a soft pool of moonglow, stood a small pavilion. Octagonal and open on all sides, it rested on a low platform with slender wooden columns at each corner, and a roof woven from palm fronds. Gauzy curtains hung between the pillars, stirring gently. Inside waited a low divan piled with cushions, its very shape a promise of rest. The pavilion seemed to say, without words, that refuge was not only permitted here but expected. Yet the garden's heart held his gaze most of all. An ancient pomegranate tree with a gnarled trunk and crooked branches that gave it the presence of a patient guardian. Many leaves had fallen, leaving the boughs bare, but several fruits still hung from them, heavy and round. Some had split open, exposing clusters of ruby seeds that caught the moonlight and glimmered as if the tree carried its own secret fire. As the wanderer approached, a faint rustle stirred at the base of the trunk. He looked down and saw a tiny desert mouse nibbling at a fallen pomegranate that had cracked open on the ground. The mouse held a crimson seed in its paws and ate with deliberate contentment. The wanderer remained perfectly still, smiling at the quiet intimacy of the scene. In this sanctuary, even the smallest creatures moved as though time were gentle. After a moment, the mouse paused and lifted its head, whiskers trembling. It regarded him for a heartbeat, then flicked its tail and vanished into the undergrowth. Leaves quivered briefly and settled, and the garden returned to its deep hush. Drawn by the brook's quiet song, the wanderer followed its winding course to a round pool near the back wall. Smooth stones, softened by thick moss, embraced the water's edge. The surface was dark and mirror-still, punctuated by broad lily pads. Among them floated several white lotus flowers with petals closed for the night, like small boats moored in a silent harbour waiting for dawn. The moon's reflection hovered on the water as a pale disk that quivered whenever a drop from the spring above blinked into the pool. Slender golden fish glided just beneath the surface, and when one rose to catch a moth with a soft splash, ripples ran outward in widening rings. A frog sat on a mossy stone, no larger than the wanderer's hand, watching with bright, unwavering eyes. Its throat pulsed gently as it breathed. When the wanderer crouched in greeting, the frog waited a beat, and then slipped into the water with a quiet plop, disappearing as neatly as if it had folded itself into the dark. Only then did he notice he had been holding his breath. He exhaled slowly, careful not to shatter the stillness. The calm of the garden had reached inside him and rearranged something. His heartbeat eased until it seemed to match the soft pulse of running water. worry and fatigue, which had clung to him for so long that he barely remembered carrying them, loosened and fell away. Here he could simply exist, unburdened, safe, and profoundly at peace. He wandered back toward the center, letting the night's coolness brush his face. His fingers grazed something smooth set into the stone wall, and when he leaned closer, he saw a marble plaque carved with flowing Persian calligraphy. The letters caught the moonlight and seemed faintly luminous. He traced the script with his fingertips and read, "For the solace of weary hearts and the delight of curious souls, this garden was made. May it ever be a refuge." Warmth spread through his chest, not the warmth of the air, but the warmth of being understood by someone he would never meet. He bowed his head and whispered thanks to the long-ago maker of this hidden place. Then he sat on a bench beneath the plaque and let the words settle. He thought of the many nights he had walked beneath indifferent stars, the desert's vastness pressing on him until the world felt too wide and he felt too small. He had asked himself again and again what he was seeking and why he kept moving. Tonight the answer rose as quietly as the brook. He had been seeking a sanctuary, a moment of grace, a meeting with beauty that asked nothing from him. The palace had offered those gifts freely, as if it had been waiting for him to arrive. His road had not been gentle, and he had not always walked it bravely. Yet here, in this secret garden under the palace, hope felt tangible again. Moss underfoot, jasmine on the air, water persisting through stone. He smiled, moisture brightening his eyes, and let the tenderness stay. At last he rose and walked toward the pavilion, drawn by its quiet invitation. He stepped onto the platform and moved between the swaying curtains. The cushions on the divan yielded beneath him with a softness that made him sigh aloud, and a faint scent of cedar rose from the fabric as if the wood remembered sun. From this sheltered perch, he could see nearly the whole garden. The pond's silver surface flickering through leaves, the dark silhouettes of trees, the arch of the stairway leading back up, and above everything, the wide scatter of stars. He tilted his face toward the sky. In the clear desert air, the constellations shone sharp and numerous, their light steady in a way that made time feel vast. He found Orion's belt low on the horizon, then lifted his gaze to where Vega glittered, just as the scholar had promised at supper, and from there he traced the subtle line to the North Star's faithful glow. The knowledge felt like a thread connecting him to the sleeping hall above, to the scholar's soft breathing, to Farron's kindness, to human company that did not demand that he be anything other than himself. Drowsiness began to gather at the edges of his awareness. The night's discoveries had filled him, and now his body asked for rest with a gentle insistence. The garden was so quiet, he could hear the slow, steady thump of his own heart, and the sound did not feel lonely here. It sounded like belonging. A light shawl lay folded at one end of the divan, left as if in expectation. He unfolded it and draped it across himself. The air cooled his cheeks, but beneath the cloth, he was warmly cocooned. For a moment, he considered returning upstairs before dawn, imagined himself climbing the spiral steps, slipping back into his alcove, pretending he had never found this place. The thought faded almost immediately, dissolving like mist in first sunlight. No one had told him to leave, and everything around him seemed to welcome his staying. He closed his eyes. He was hovering on the threshold of sleep when something brushed his fingers with a silky, living touch. His eyes opened to a shadow slipping through the pavilion's curtain. A sleek grey cat, eyes green in the moonlight. It was the same friendly creature he'd seen earlier in the courtyard, padding between cushions as if it owned them. The cat hopped onto the divan, offered a soft, familiar murr, and then curled up on the wanderer's blanketed lap with the calm certainty of an animal that knows a safe place when it finds one. A quiet laugh escaped him, warm with surprise. "Hello, little friend," he whispered, stroking the cat's velvet ears. The cat answered with a deep purr and kneaded the cushion once or twice before settling into a comfortable circle against his warmth. Companionship flooded him, simple, physical, unquestioning. Alone in this hidden garden, he was no longer solitary. The cat's purring blended with the brook's murmuring, and together they made a lullaby that did not need words. He rested his hand on the cat's back and felt the gentle rise and fall of its breathing. And in that steady rhythm, his own thoughts loosened. This time, he did not resist sleep. He let it take him the way water takes a stone, patiently, kindly, without force. Time passed in a soft blur. At some point, he drifted upward into a lighter doze, and the cat on his lap lifted its head, ears turning toward a distant vibration. Through the ground came the low resonance of a gong struck far above, muffled by stone and earth. It was the same bell that had sounded at sunset, now ringing again to welcome the approaching dawn. Down here, the tone arrived as a gentle hum more than a sound, enough to stir him without breaking the peace. The cat blinked, unimpressed by distant ceremony, and then settled again. The wanderer opened his eyes a fraction. The garden still lay in darkness, though beyond the walls the eastern sky was beginning to pale. The air had that subtle pre-dawn quality, as if the world were drawing a long breath. He felt the mild tug of responsibility. Perhaps he should return to his room before others woke and wondered where he had gone. Yet his body remained heavy with comfort. As he lay there, half awake, he sensed a presence near the stairway arch. He turned his head slightly, and for a heartbeat, he saw a figure standing at the threshold, a quiet silhouette draped in robes, still as the stone around it. A glimmer of faint light from above caught the face, and he almost recognized Farron's gentle features, softened by the hour. The figure did not speak. It only watched, as if to make sure the guest was safe, and then it slipped away up the stairs so smoothly it might have been a trick of shadow. Ivy leaves rustled softly in its wake, and then the garden returned to stillness. The wanderer felt no fear, only a deeper calm spreading through him. Whether the watcher had been Farron, a guardian of the palace, or a kindness invented by his own drowsy mind, the meaning was the same. He was being kept. He was welcome. He let his eyes close again. Above, dawn was quietly blossoming across the sky, but the garden lingered in darkness a little longer, protected by walls and foliage, as if it wished to hold the night to itself. Somewhere in the leaves, a nightingale began to sing, low and sweet. The notes rose and fell in a slow, liquid line, threading music through the fading hush. The song did not pull him back to full wakefulness. It sank into him and carried him down. In his dream, he walked across golden desert sands beneath a brightening sky, but he was not lost. The scent of jasmine travelled with him, and the soft murmur of running water kept pace at his side like a companion. He understood, in the way dreams can make understanding effortless, that a home is not always a fixed place on a map. Sometimes it is a memory you can return to, a sanctuary you carry in your chest. And so he slept, cradled in the secret garden beneath the palace, while the world above slowly awakened. The brook kept its quiet song, the moss held the coolness of night, and the last fading stars watched as dawn found the horizon. In time, the wanderer would open his eyes and greet the new day renewed. But for now, he rested in perfect peace, watched over by the palace's gentle spirit, and a small grey cat curled warm on his lap.